She gave a stranger a cup of coffee and unknowingly changed the course of his entire life. What she didn't know, that man was hiding a secret worth billions. When the truth finally came out, the whole city stopped to watch, but nothing could prepare her for what he chose next. It was one of those mornings when the wind seemed to come from every direction, harsh, sharp, and unforgiving. The kind of winter morning that creeps into your bones and makes you question your place in the world. Snow hadn't fallen yet, but the sky was already the color of steel, promising something heavy. Ellie, no older than 25, wrapped her worn-out coat tighter around her body as she crossed the avenue. Her boots, second-hand and slightly torn at the soles, let in the cold from the pavement. But she didn't complain. She never did. It was just another morning, another shift at the small diner in Brooklyn where she worked 6 days a week, sometimes 7, just to survive. The streets were still waking up. Steam rose from the manholes. A bus hissed in the distance. Ellie walked behind the restaurant to the back entrance, as she always did, careful not to slip on the icy concrete. But that morning, something was different. She almost missed it. Just a shape at first, curled up against the brick wall behind the trash bins. A person, no, a man, lying on his side, clutching himself, shivering uncontrollably. His clothes were dirty, his shoes mismatched, his beard thick and unkempt. She froze for a second, unsure whether to move closer or just keep walking. But Ellie wasn't like most people. She bent down slowly, cautious but kind, and whispered, "Sir, are you okay?" He didn't answer. His lips were blue and his hands looked raw from the cold. Ellie looked around, no one else in sight. Just her and this stranger, in a city known for pretending not to see. Without thinking much, she ran inside, grabbed the first clean coffee mug she could find, filled it with fresh coffee, and snuck back out. She placed it beside him, along with a slice of cherry pie that had been left over from the night before. And then, she did something most wouldn't. She took off the scarf around her neck and gently placed it over his shoulders. He looked up at her for the first time, and in that brief moment, barely 2 seconds, something passed between them. A silent thank you. A flicker of dignity restored. Maybe even a spark neither of them recognized just yet. Ellie didn't ask questions. She simply said, "Stay warm," and walked back inside to start her shift. What she didn't know, what none of us could have known, is that this man wasn't who he seemed to be. He wasn't just lost. He wasn't just poor. He had walked away from a world most people would never dare leave behind. But what could make a man give up a fortune? And more importantly, why did that look in Ellie's eyes shake him more than the cold ever could? Ellie didn't speak of the man to anyone that day. Not to her manager, who was too busy counting receipts. Not to the cook who shouted orders with grease-stained hands. And not to the regulars who filled the diner's booths like clockwork, complaining about politics or the price of eggs. But her thoughts kept drifting back to the alley. Was he still there? Had he taken the coffee? Did he even make it through the morning? She peeked out the back door during her break. The pie plate was empty, the coffee cup was gone, and the scarf? He had folded it neatly and left it on top of the bin. That simple act, such a small gesture, stopped her heart for a second. Someone who had nothing still chose to return what wasn't his. Ellie stared at the scarf. She didn't pick it up. That night, after the diner closed, she stepped outside again, this time with purpose. The cold had deepened and flakes of snow finally began to fall, silent and soft. She carried with her a thick blanket from her own bed and another piece of pie wrapped in foil. But the man wasn't there. The spot behind the bin was empty. No footprints, no trace. Only the scarf remained, waiting, like it still carried part of the story. Ellie stood there, blanket in arms, unsure of what she felt. Disappointment, worry, a strange ache she couldn't explain. She left the blanket behind anyway, folded neatly against the wall, just in case. The next morning he returned. She saw him from the kitchen window, sitting, not lying down this time, his back straight, eyes alert. He held the blanket around his shoulders like it was made of gold, but it was the way he looked at the sky that struck her, as if he hadn't seen it in years. Ellie didn't say anything when she walked outside. She just sat next to him on the cold concrete and offered a smile. And for the first time, he spoke. "Why did you help me?" His voice was rough, tired, but not unkind. Ellie shrugged. "Because you looked like you needed someone to care." He turned away, but not before she caught it, just for a moment, the shine in his eyes. There was something about him, something he was hiding, not just from the world, but from himself. And Ellie had no idea how far this silent kindness would take her. But sometimes, a quiet alley in Brooklyn is where fate begins to whisper. He told her his name was Ben. Just that. No last name, no story behind it. Just Ben. He said it quietly, like someone speaking into a mirror for the first time after years in the dark. Ellie didn't push. She wasn't the kind to pry. She believed in giving people space, especially the ones who'd clearly lost something. But what exactly had he lost? Ben returned to the alley every morning after that. Always early, always quiet. Sometimes he'd help carry boxes into the diner. Other times he just sat nearby, listening to the hum of the city waking up, like he was relearning how the world worked. What Ellie didn't know, and how could she, was that Ben wasn't just running from the cold. He was running from a name that opened doors, that moved millions, that sat printed on the side of skyscrapers, embossed on charity plaques and written in gold on the cover of Forbes magazine. Walker, Benjamin Walker. But to him, that name had become a prison. It happened months before he met Ellie. A family scandal, buried deep behind designer curtains and silver spoons, had cracked his world wide open. A betrayal. Not the kind you read in the tabloids, but the kind that shatters trust in a way that makes you question everything, everyone, even blood. Ben had looked around at the suits and smiles at the boardroom table and felt sick. These were people who had built empires. But at what cost? Love was bought. Loyalty was traded. Image mattered more than truth. So he walked away, left the penthouse, left the drivers, left the money, left the life everyone said he was lucky to have. No warning, no note, just vanished. He wanted to know who he was without the name, without the armor. But he didn't expect Ellie. He didn't expect her kindness, her warmth, her silence that never judged. A girl who had every reason to be bitter but wasn't, who had nothing to give but gave anyway. Ben hadn't planned on staying. He thought a few nights in the cold would shake off the weight. But now, he wasn't so sure, because every morning she smiled at him, not for who he had been, but for who he was, in that moment. And slowly, beneath the layers of dirt and silence, Benjamin Walker began to feel human again. The days passed quietly, like the soft fall of snow against a window pane. Each morning, Ben was there. Not always speaking, not always smiling, but present. Ellie began bringing 2 coffees instead of 1. One for her, one for him. No words were exchanged the first few times. They simply sat on the back steps of the diner, sipping in silence while the city groaned to life around them. Winter had settled in completely now. The sidewalk shimmered with ice. People walked faster, spoke less. But in that little space behind the diner, something slow and steady was growing. Ben started helping her without being asked, carrying crates from the delivery truck, fixing the door hinge that always creaked, cleaning off the snow from the back steps. Small things. But to Ellie, they weren't small at all. It had been a long time since someone cared enough to notice what she needed, even before she asked. One evening, after the last table had cleared and the lights in the kitchen had dimmed, Ellie sat across from him on a milk crate. She looked tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, but the kind that life wears into you. "My mom used to say," she murmured, wrapping her hands around a steaming mug, "that kind people are like fire in the cold. You don't always see the flame, but you feel it." Ben didn't respond right away. He looked at her, really looked at her, and in that moment, he felt something strange stir inside. Guilt, maybe. Or was it gratitude? He hadn't told her the truth. Not yet. Not even close. And yet, she was letting him in. They began sharing stories in pieces. Ellie spoke of growing up with very little, of her dream to one day open her own bakery. Just a tiny place, she said, where people could feel at home. Her eyes always softened when she talked about it, like she was picturing the warmth of it in her mind. Ben never spoke about his past, but he asked questions. He listened, and sometimes listening says more than any confession ever could. They laughed more now, quietly, easily. The kind of laughter that comes not from jokes but from feeling safe enough to simply be. And with every shared smile, with every silent pause, the line between their worlds began to blur. He had stepped away from everything to disappear. But now, he was beginning to wonder if maybe, just maybe, he had been found. One morning, Ellie arrived at the diner to find Ben already inside. She blinked, confused. The door had been locked. She was sure of it. But there he was, sleeves rolled up, wiping down tables like he belonged there. The manager, Mrs. Langford, stood nearby with a clipboard, watching him with her usual stern expression. But when she caught Ellie's eye, she shrugged and muttered, "We were short on help. He offered. Seems capable enough." Ellie didn't say anything. She watched Ben from across the room, moving quietly between the booths, picking up menus, setting silverware. It was strange, seeing him in the light, inside, upright, like part of the place, not the shadow that waited by the back steps. He caught her gaze and gave a small, almost embarrassed smile. "I figured it was time I earned my coffee," he said softly. And just like that, he became part of the team. They gave him the dishwashing job, the kind most people avoided. Hot water, slippery floors, hours of standing. But Ben didn't complain. He worked steadily, quietly. And though he stayed mostly in the back, Ellie felt his presence more than ever. They shared glances through the kitchen window, stolen words during shift changes. It was unspoken, but something between them had shifted. Still, there was something strange about how quickly Ben adapted. He moved like someone who understood systems, who noticed what others missed. He repaired a faulty faucet with materials from the supply closet, rearranged the pantry shelves so inventory ran smoother. Even Mrs. Langford, who rarely gave compliments, said, "That man's got a sharp mind." Not what you'd expect from the streets. Ellie felt it too. Little things. The way he spoke, polished but carefully muted. His hands, calloused from recent work, yes, but shaped by a past that wasn't built on labor. His posture, his manners, the way he listened when customers complained. It didn't match the story he never told. One evening as they stood outside after closing, snow falling again in soft flurries, Ellie looked at him a little longer than usual. "You're not who you pretend to be, are you?" Ben didn't answer, not with words. He only lowered his eyes, took a breath and said, "Not yet, but I'm trying." And just like that, a truth hovered between them, not fully spoken, not fully denied. What would happen when the rest came to light? Neither of them knew. But some secrets don't stay buried forever. The days had grown shorter, and Christmas lights blinked faintly through the frost-covered windows of the city. The air was thick with December, cinnamon, chimney smoke, and something else, the longing people carry at the end of each year. At the diner, a small tree stood crooked near the entrance, decorated with paper stars and faded ornaments brought in by the staff. No one had the money for gifts, but they had each other, and for most that was enough. Ellie had kept her birthday quiet. She always did. She didn't want a fuss, didn't want people feeling sorry for her. Another year gone, another year still fighting to stay afloat. She clocked in, tied her apron, and smiled like always. But Ben remembered. He didn't say anything when she arrived. He just nodded like usual, went back to stacking dishes in the back. The day passed without fanfare. Orders came in, plates went out, life went on, until the end of her shift. Ellie walked into the back room to grab her coat. And there it was. A small brown box wrapped clumsily with napkin string, sitting on top of her things. No note, no tag, just a quiet offering. She looked around. Ben was wiping down the sink, pretending not to watch her, but she knew he was. She untied the string, opened the box. Inside was a charm. An old, delicate locket, clearly worn by time, with 2 tiny spaces inside, one empty, and the other holding a folded piece of paper. Ellie unfolded it slowly. Written in neat, careful script were just 5 words. "This is for your future." She blinked hard, swallowed once, then again. It wasn't the locket that struck her. It wasn't even the note. It was the thought behind it, the knowing that he had seen her dream, the bakery, the hope, the heart she tried to keep hidden. And instead of flowers or perfume or some silly card, he gave her something to believe in. Ellie looked up, her voice caught in her throat. But Ben only smiled, that quiet, crooked smile that never asked for attention. And in that moment she knew. Whatever he was running from, it had softened him, not hardened him. And maybe, just maybe, it had led him right to her. The first sign came in the form of a phone call. Not to Ben, he didn't own a phone anymore, but to the diner. Mrs. Langford answered it with her usual gruffness, her eyebrows furrowing deeper with every word she heard. When she hung up, she looked at Ben like she was seeing him for the first time. "You've got a visitor," she said quietly. "Says it's urgent." Ben froze. Not many people knew where he was. In fact, only one person could have found him. He stepped out into the cold afternoon light, heart pounding, and saw him standing across the street wrapped in a long black wool coat, impeccably dressed, eyes sharp as glass. His older brother, Jonathan. Ben didn't move, not even a wave, just stared, like a child caught in a lie too big to fix. Jonathan crossed the street and stopped a few feet away. His voice was low but firm. "Dad's gone." Those 2 words cut through the air like a blade. Ben looked down, not at the ground, but at his shoes. Old, cracked, nothing like the ones he used to wear. Shoes that told the truth he'd chosen. "He died yesterday morning. Heart attack, in his study. You need to come back." Ben didn't answer. A part of him had always known this moment would come, just not so soon, and not like this. "There's a clause in the will," Jonathan continued. "You're the first heir, but the board, they want reassurance. They want to know you're stable, presentable, that you haven't completely lost your mind." Ben let out a breath, half laugh, half pain. "So I'm still good for something then. You'll inherit the estate, the company, the title, everything," Jonathan said flatly. "But there's one condition." Ben already knew. He didn't need it said out loud. The Walkers had always cared more about image than integrity. Jonathan's jaw tightened. "You can't be tied to anyone, outside our world. No poor girls from Brooklyn, no sob stories, clean break, or everything goes to the board." Ben's throat tightened. Ellie's name wasn't spoken, but her presence filled the space between every word. He turned his head, just slightly, and through the frosted window behind them, he saw her, inside the diner, smiling gently, pouring coffee for a couple sitting in the back booth, completely unaware that the world outside had just shifted. And Ben stood still, caught between 2 lives, one that promised power, and one that had already given him peace. But even as the snow began to fall again, gently dusting his shoulders, he knew that some storms don't come from the sky. They come from the choices we're forced to make. The following days felt like living inside someone else's life. Ben showed up at the diner, just like always. He cleaned the same dishes, stacked the same chairs, and nodded at the same customers. But inside, something had shifted. He was quieter now, slower, like every step carried weight. Ellie noticed. Of course she did. He'd laugh, but it wouldn't quite reach his eyes. He'd smile, but the corners of his mouth didn't hold it the way they used to. And when she asked if he was okay, he'd say, "Just tired." Nothing more. But it wasn't tiredness. It was the pull. The world he had walked away from had returned, not with open arms, but with cold hands and signatures on paper. A world full of offices and obligation, where everything was measured: money, loyalty, even love. Jonathan called again, twice. Ben didn't pick up the first time, but the second time he answered and listened. The details were clear now, the lawyers were moving, the estate was massive, the headlines were waiting, and the board, powerful, calculating, would only accept him if he played by the rules. One rule most of all. He had to end it with Ellie, quietly, permanently. As if she were a phase, a season he'd simply outgrown. And yet, when he looked at her, even across the diner, even in the smallest of moments, he saw something no empire could offer: a softness, a safety, a truth. Late one evening, after the last customer had left and the floor had been mopped twice, Ben stood beside her at the register. Snow tapped against the glass door. The world was quiet. "Ellie," he began, voice shaking more than he expected. If I ever had to leave suddenly, would you be okay?" She looked up, confused. "Why would you ask that?" "I don't know, just wondering." She smiled, but it was cautious. "I've gotten through a lot alone. I guess I'd manage, but I'd miss you." Ben didn't reply, because in that moment, he realized something terrifying, something sacred. He wasn't just choosing between wealth and a woman. He was choosing between the life he was born into and the life he wanted to become, and time was running out. The morning started like any other. Coffee brewed, toast sizzled on the griddle. The regulars gathered at their usual booths, newspapers rustling, spoons clinking against chipped porcelain mugs. Ellie was behind the counter, tying her apron when the bell above the door rang. She turned, expecting another early bird, but instead, silence fell across the diner. 3 men in dark suits stepped inside, and behind them, tall, calm, no longer in dishwater clothes, stood Ben. Not just Ben. Benjamin Walker, clean-shaven, pressed jacket, hair combed back, a posture that no longer shrank into corners but stood squarely in the room, eyes steady and filled with something unspeakably hard. Mrs. Langford's jaw dropped. Someone dropped a fork. Ellie stood frozen, hands still at her waist, the knot in her apron unfinished. He walked toward her, slowly, gently, as if each step could crack the ground between them. "I didn't want it to happen like this," he said softly, "but I can't lie anymore." She opened her mouth, but no sound came. That afternoon, news broke across every channel in the city. Billionaire heir resurfaces after disappearance, refuses inheritance in shocking press conference. Cameras caught him standing at the steps of the Walker building, his brother on one side, the board on the other. But the words that echoed, the ones no one could forget, came from his mouth, steady and full of truth. "I've spent months working beside people who earn with their hands, who love with their whole hearts, who survive without applause. And among them, I met someone who reminded me what it means to live honestly. If walking away from this legacy means keeping that kind of love, then I walk." Flashbulbs went off. Reporters shouted. Board members muttered behind clenched jaws. But Benjamin Walker stepped down, and in a corner diner in Brooklyn, Ellie sat alone at the back booth, watching the broadcast on a tiny wall-mounted TV. Her hands trembled around her cup. Not because he had lied, but because he had chosen her, in front of the world. The world kept moving. Cars still honked. People still rushed down sidewalks with coffee in hand. Headlines faded as quickly as they came. What had once stopped Manhattan became yesterday's news. But for Ellie, life didn't just return to normal. Because nothing would ever be quite the same. She hadn't spoken to Ben since that morning, the morning he walked into the diner wearing a name she didn't recognize, and then stood in front of the world and chose her. She'd watched the broadcast alone. And afterward, she didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just sat in silence. The doorbell of the diner chimed again 2 days later. It was late. Snow had thickened on the windows. The booths were empty. Mrs. Langford had gone home early, and Ellie had stayed behind to close alone. He stepped in without fanfare, without a suit, no bodyguards, no eyes following him. Just Ben. Not Benjamin Walker, the heir. Not the man who disappeared. Just Ben. He walked toward her slowly, holding something in his hand. The locket he had once given her. This time it had 2 photos inside. One was hers, and the other, a tiny black and white picture of the bakery she once dreamed of owning, printed from an old article he had found. "I didn't come here to ask for forgiveness," he said, voice low and sincere. "I came to ask if I can start over, from here, with nothing but my name. And you." Ellie stared at him for a long moment. The silence between them felt heavier than any storm. Then, she reached across the counter and took the locket, held it close, and without a word she walked around the counter and hugged him. Not like someone who needed saving, but like someone who had chosen to. The next morning, the diner opened like always. But something was different. 2 coffees sat side by side on the counter. A soft hum of laughter filled the air, and in the back booth, where love had once bloomed in silence, now lived the sound of something real, something rooted, something stronger than fortune. Because sometimes it isn't the world that changes everything. It's the quiet choices we make, when no one else is watching. And Ellie had been watching all along. What would you have done? Would you have chosen the comfort of wealth or the risk of love? How many times in life do we stay silent when our hearts are screaming to speak? Ben walked away from billions, not for fame, not for pride, but for something most people spend a lifetime searching for. Someone who saw him for who he truly was. And Ellie, she didn't ask for a miracle. She just kept showing up, with kindness, with honesty, with warmth. So ask yourself, what are you choosing today? Is it making you proud or just keeping you safe? If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you of your own strength, your own choices, your own quiet dreams, don't keep it to yourself. Leave a comment. Tell us what you would have done, and if you've ever had to choose between comfort and truth. We want to hear your story. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that might just change your life. And now, click the video that's appearing on your screen, because there's another story waiting for you. One filled with heart, courage, and the kind of moments that stay with you long after the screen goes dark. We'll see you there.